The day that was supposed to be the happiest of my life turned into the most humiliating nightmare. We had invited families and friends to celebrate our baby's naming ceremony, but when the door opened and my wife's ex walked in, the secret he carried shattered everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and family. Hi, my name is Robert. The first sound that shattered my celebration was not the music nor the clinking glasses, nor the gentle laughter of loved ones. It was the knock at the door. A knock that felt heavy, deliberate, and oddly final, as though destiny itself had come to collect a debt. I remember standing still, my newborn child in my arms, her warmth pressed against my chest as guests cheered and raised their glasses. Everything in that moment was golden. The shimmering lights, the soft fragrance of fresh flowers, the sound of joy filling the room. Yet when that knock came, my entire body stiffened, as if I had just heard the beginning of my undoing. I turned my head and saw the door swing open, and there he stood, tall, confident, and uninvited. My wife's ex. His presence felt like a blade slicing into the heart of our perfect illusion. He did not smile. He did not greet anyone. His eyes were locked onto one thing, the child in my arms. His gaze was not casual, not curious. It was certain, possessive, as if he already knew what no one else in that room dared to imagine. A silence fell instantly across the celebration. The chatter drained away. The music became background noise, awkward and misplaced. Friends and family froze mid-sip, mid-laugh, mid-step, their expressions twisting into confusion. I felt their stares pressing on me, on my wife, on the stranger who was no stranger at all. The weight of that silence crushed me, filling the air with questions no one spoke aloud. My wife, Jennifer, stood across the room. She had been radiant moments before, her smile stretched wide, her posture graceful, her blue dress glowing beneath the lights. But now her body faltered, her smile collapsed. Her hands shook slightly as she clutched the edge of the table for balance. Her eyes widened, with a fear I had never seen in her before, as though every secret she had tried to bury was clawing its way to the surface. In that frozen instant, I knew something was wrong. The way she looked at him was not the way a woman looked at an unwelcome ghost. It was recognition. It was dread. It was guilt. I felt my knees weaken beneath me, as though my body already understood the truth before my mind could form the word. The ex did not speak, but his silence screamed louder than any accusation. His stare at my child was not one of admiration or curiosity. It was a claim, an assertion, a declaration that something in my life, in my marriage, in my very identity as a father, was about to be ripped away. My arms tightened around my baby instinctively, as though I could shield her from this invisible storm. Her small face was peaceful, innocent, untouched by the tensions suffocating the room. But as I held her, an unbearable thought crept into my chest like poison. What if she was not mine? I remember how the room seemed to tilt, the walls closing in on me. Guests shifted uneasily, glancing from me to Jennifer to the man at the door. No one dared to move, but the atmosphere swelled with unspoken anticipation, like a theater audience waiting for the curtain to rise on a scene they could not look away from. My throat tightened. My heartbeat thundered in my ear. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, to protect my family from whatever truth threatened to unravel it. But I stood frozen, a spectator to my own destruction. Jennifer lowered her gaze, her body trembling with shame. That was when I knew this was no misunderstanding, no coincidence, no accident. His arrival was not random. He had come with purpose, armed with a secret that would gut me in front of everyone I loved. And so, in the middle of what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, I felt the ground beneath me split open. What began as a celebration of life had transformed into the funeral of my trust, my dignity, and perhaps even my marriage. The knock at the door was not just an interruption, it was the beginning of the end. The silence, after his arrival, lingered long after the knock had faded. It was the kind of silence that does not merely settle in a room, but wraps itself around the soul, suffocating, pressing, demanding acknowledgement. Every eye that had once glowed with joy now carried suspicion, confusion, or pity. I could feel their stares digging into me, dissecting my life, dismantling the image of perfection I had worked so hard to build. As I stood holding my child, my arms trembling with a mix of fear and denial, my mind began its desperate retreat into memory. I searched for reassurance, for proof that my life was intact, that my marriage was unbroken, that the child I loved so deeply was mine in every way that mattered. But instead of comfort, I found cracks. Cracks I had ignored, cracks I had painted over, cracks that now returned to haunt me. It began months earlier, with the business trip. My wife had insisted she had no choice. A company retreat out of town, a gathering of partners and executives. I remember her excitement, how her eyes shone with determination when she told me she would attend. At first I had been proud that she had ambition, proud that she carried herself with such confidence. But beneath that pride, there had been unease, a whisper that something was off. I had brushed it away, convincing myself it was nothing more than my own insecurity. The night she left, I stood in our bedroom, watching her pack. I remember the way she folded her clothes neatly, her perfume filling the air, her expression unreadable. She kissed me goodbye with a smile that felt just a little too practiced, a little too careful. I told myself it was simply my imagination, that I was overthinking. But as the days stretched on, her calls were shorter, her messages more distant. I told myself it was stress, that business travel was draining. I believed what I wanted to believe. When she returned, everything shifted. She looked different, not outwardly, but in subtle ways. Her eyes carried something she could not disguise, a kind of hidden guilt that flickered in fleeting moments when she thought I was not watching. But then came the news, the pregnancy. She delivered it with trembling hands, tears streaming down her face, and I collapsed into her embrace, overwhelmed by gratitude. For years I had prayed for this. For years I had imagined the sound of a child's laughter in our home. And so, I silenced every doubt, every shadow of suspicion, burying them beneath the weight of my desire for joy. Now standing in that room with my child in my arms and her ex at the door, those buried suspicions clawed back to life. The timing, the distance, the look in her eyes when she returned, the guilt I had chosen not to see. I realized then that my silence had not protected me, it had only made me blind. I glanced across the room at Jennifer. She stood frozen, her body trembling, her face pale. The mask she had worn so flawlessly was slipping now, cracking under the weight of exposure. I saw in her eyes a confession without words. I saw a plea for mercy, mixed with terror, and I hated myself for recognizing it, for knowing exactly what it meant. The man at the door stepped further inside, his presence filling the space like a storm cloud swallowing the sun. He did not need to speak. His silence was enough. My mind screamed with questions, but none reached my lips. All I could feel was the cold, crushing weight of betrayal pressing into my chest. The guests shifted uncomfortably, their joy twisted into unease. Some looked away, pretending not to notice. Others stared openly, hungry for answer. My parents sat stiffly in the corner, their pride dissolving into shame. Friends exchanged glances, whispers forming at the edges of the silence. I stood at the center of it all, the unwilling star of a tragedy I had never asked for. Inside me, a storm rage, hurt, humiliation, fear. Every emotion collided violently, tearing through me like shards of glass. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to collapse to my knees. I wanted to run from that room and never return. But I did none of those things. I simply stood still, my child in my arms, my body numb, my heart unraveling thread by thread. The backstory of our marriage replayed in my mind, with cruel clarity. The years of devotion, the sacrifices I had made, the promises whispered in the quiet of night, the belief that love was enough to protect us from the storms of life. And now the realization that love had not protected me at all. It had blinded me, lulled me into complacency, made me vulnerable to the very betrayal I now felt. As my wife's eyes filled with tears across the room, I felt the first true crack of my heart breaking, for in her expression, I did not see denial, I did not see defiance. I saw surrender. She knew the truth had come for her, and she had no strength left to fight it. That was the turning point. The moment I understood that the life I thought I had built was not mine at all. It was a fragile illusion, one held together by lies, by silence, by my own desperate hope, and now, before the eyes of everyone who mattered, it was crumbling. The knock at the door had been the sound of my undoing, but her eyes confirmed it. The betrayal was real, and I knew the worst was yet to come. The room no longer belonged to me. It belonged to him, the man at the door, the uninvited shadow from my wife's past. His silence was louder than any announcement, his gaze sharper than any accusation. He moved forward slowly, each step deliberate, as if he knew the weight of the revelation he carried. My chest tightened with every inch he closed between himself and the child in my arms. The guests parted unconsciously, their bodies leaning back, their eyes wide, their breaths shallow. The air thickened with an unspoken dread, a collective awareness that something irreversible was about to be unleashed. No one dared to speak. No one dared to interrupt. The celebration had transformed into a stage, and every person present was now a captive audience. My wife stood paralyzed across the room, her trembling hands pressed against her stomach as though she could hold herself together with sheer force. Her face was pale, her eyes glassy with tears she refused to shed. She looked like a woman awaiting a sentence she already knew would be guilty. In her stillness, I saw the entire truth without a single word spoken. Then it happened. His eyes shifted from me to her, and then back to the child. A faint smirk tugged at the corner of his lips, but it was not joy. It was triumph, the kind of triumph that comes from holding power over another life. And in that instant, I understood what he had come for. He was not here to congratulate, nor to reconcile. He was here to claim. The claim was not spoken aloud, but it reverberated through the room. His stare locked on the baby's features, tracing the shape of her nose, the color of her hair, the curve of her cheeks. Each second of his inspection was another blow to my heart. Because deep down, though I had buried the thought, I knew what he saw. I had seen it too, but I had silenced myself with hope. The resemblance, the undeniable resemblance. Whispers erupted like sparks in the crowd. Relatives leaned close, eyes flicking between me and him, comparing features, tracing similarities, questioning silently what none dared to voice. Friends exchanged uneasy glances, their once bright smiles frozen into masks of disbelief. Even the children, too young to understand, felt the shift, their laughter silenced by the heaviness that draped over us all. I wanted to scream that it was not true, that my family was intact, that my child was mine. But as the man's presence grew heavier, my silence betrayed me. The guests saw my stillness, my faltering expression, the way my wife refused to meet my eye. They saw the cracks spreading across the surface of our lives. And in their silence, I heard their verdict: betrayal. The betrayal was no longer a shadow. It stood tall, breathing, undeniable in the middle of my home. I turned my gaze to Jennifer. Her shoulders slumped as though the weight of the truth was crushing her. Her eyes brimmed with regret, but regret did not erase the past. I searched her face for denial, for resistance, for even the faintest attempt to shield me from the humiliation unraveling before us. But she gave me nothing, only silent admission. Only the brokenness of a woman cornered by her own secrets. The man stepped closer, his eyes now burning with certainty. He had no need to raise his voice. His very presence spoke louder than words. The way he looked at the child, the way Jennifer's body shook, the way the guests recoiled. It was enough. The secret was exposed, and there was no returning from it. The room collapsed into chaos without sound. No one shouted, yet I could hear the roaring of thoughts around me. The realization sank into every soul present, spreading like poison through the air. The child in my arms, the symbol of my greatest joy, had become the symbol of my deepest betrayal. Tears threatened to spill, but I fought them back, holding the baby tighter, as though clinging to the only piece of my world that still felt pure. But the truth clawed at me with merciless persistence. Was she truly mine, or had I been nothing more than a pawn in a cruel deception? a stand-in father for another man's child. My mind screamed with memories. The business trip, the timing of her return, the look in her eye, every suppressed doubt, every unanswered question, every moment I had silenced my instincts. Each returned now, sharper than knives. The ex finally stopped just a few steps away, his gaze unwavering, his claim unspoken yet definite. He had turned my home into a courtroom, my wife into the guilty, myself into the fool, and the guests into witnesses. Humiliation burned through me like fire. Rage pulsed in my veins. Yet beneath it all was sorrow so deep it threatened to hollow me out entirely. The dream I had cherished, the family I had longed for, lay shattered in front of me, exposed for what it truly was. A lie. Jennifer's sobs broke through the silence at last. They were soft at first, but soon they shook her body violently, her tears spilling down her face as though her soul itself was unraveling. Yet the sound of her grief did not comfort me. It only deepened the wound. For her tears confirmed what I dreaded. She had betrayed me. The guests began to stir, whispering louder now, exchanging shocked glances, their discomfort swelling into a tide that filled every corner of the room. My parents' faces were etched with shame, their bodies rigid with silent judgment. Friends shook their heads, some with pity, others with disgust. My world had not simply cracked, it had collapsed irreparably. And as the ex's shadow loomed larger over my child, I realized the consequences had only begun. This was not the end of the betrayal. It was only the beginning of its exposure. The secret was no longer hidden, and the man who had come to claim his place would not leave quietly. The moment of revelation was unbearable, but the aftermath was far worse. What began as silence had erupted into whispers, and what began as whispers grew into an invisible storm of judgment, filling every corner of the room. The air was thick with humiliation, betrayal, and pity, pressing down on me with suffocating force. I held my daughter against my chest, her small body oblivious to the chaos surrounding her. Her innocence cut deeper into me, a reminder of what I had longed for, what I had believed I had finally received, and what now seemed to be slipping through my grasp. Every second I held her, I asked myself the same question. Was she mine, or had I been living a lie from the moment my wife returned from that trip? Jennifer collapsed into a chair, her body shaking uncontrollably, as sobs tore through her once proud frame. The woman who had greeted our guests with radiant smiles and grace was now nothing more than a shattered figure drenched in guilt. She could not look at me. She could not look at anyone. She wept into her trembling hands, her mask stripped away, her secrets no longer hers to keep. The man, her ex, stood tall, his presence unyielding. His silence was not the silence of shame. It was the silence of triumph, of a man who had come to stake his claim in the cruelest, most public way possible. He had not only stripped me of my dignity, but had stripped Jennifer of hers as well, and he had done it in front of everyone who mattered. The guests shifted, some glancing toward the door as if eager to escape the unbearable tension, others staring at me with a mixture of pity and horror. My parents sat in rigid silence, their disappointment heavier than words could ever express. Friends who had once celebrated with us now looked at me as though I had been a fool, and perhaps I had been. The fallout was immediate and unrelenting. Questions rose like daggers in the room, though no one dared to speak them aloud. Who was the true father? Had Jennifer deceived me knowingly? How long had she hidden this? And the cruelest question of all, what would happen to the child now? In the center of that storm, I felt my world collapse piece by piece. The vows we had exchanged, the life we had built, the trust I had given, all lay in ruins at my feet. Betrayal was no longer just an idea. It was flesh and blood. It was living, breathing, undeniable. But then came the twist, the final cruelty I had not prepared myself for. Jennifer lifted her tear-streaked face, her voice breaking as she whispered an admission I wished I had never heard. She had agreed. She had consented. The child I cradled in my arms had been conceived, not by chance, not by fate, but by choice. In the loneliness of her business trip, in the distance between us, she had reached back into her past, and invited betrayal into our marriage. The room spun. My knees weakened. My chest burned with a pain no blade could ever inflict. It was not just infidelity. It was premeditated. It was deliberate. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than any accident ever could. The guests gasped, their whispers rising into stunned exclamation. My parents lowered their heads in shame, unable to meet my eyes. Friends turned away, some shaking their heads in disbelief. The humiliation was complete. The image of my family once admired now lay broken, reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale. I looked at my daughter one last time, her innocence glowing against the darkness that surrounded me. Tears blurred my vision. As I kissed her forehead, my heart splitting between love and despair. She had not chosen this. She was not to blame, and yet she was the living embodiment of the secret that had destroyed me. As I placed her gently into her crib, I felt the weight of finality settle into my bones. My marriage was gone. My trust was shattered. My dignity had been stripped. And though my heart longed to cling to what little remained, I knew the truth. Nothing would ever be the same again. The climax of that day was not the celebration of life I had dreamed of. It was the burial of love, trust in the family I thought I had built. And in the silence that followed, I felt myself transformed. Not stronger, not yet healed, but awakened. I understood now the danger of blind trust, the cruelty of secrets, and the devastation of betrayal. And as the guests left one by one, their whispers echoing long after the door closed, I stood alone in the ruins of my life, holding on to the only thing I could still claim, my own resolve to rise from the ashes of what had burned to the ground. Betrayal is a wound that leaves scars far deeper than the eye can see. On that day I learned that even the most beautiful celebrations can hide the darkest secret. I learned that trust can be shattered in a single moment, and that sometimes the people we love most are the very ones who destroy us. But I also learned that survival is possible. Even when your world collapses in front of everyone you know, you can rise again, you can rebuild, you can choose to let the pain shape you into someone stronger. And now I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in my place? Have you ever faced a betrayal so deep it shook the foundation of your life? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to know your story. If you want more real family drama stories like this one, do not forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and turn on the notification bell. More stories are coming, and you do not want to miss them.